Hello, wildlifers. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm glad to say that today the talk is being uh, hosted by our Trinidad and Tobago chapter. Hope you are all doing fine. Uh, we members of Rotary Fellowship of Wildlifers for Conservation share a common interest, that is wildlife and its conservation, willing to work with the 119-year-old organization Rotary towards building a future in which people and nature thrive. Uh, to share a few notes about our fellowship group, we are a group of over 700 individuals who have globally united around a common interest with the primary purpose to network and further friendship. Our purpose is to create awareness about importance of wildlife to promote lasting friendships outside one's own Rotary Club, district, and country, and to promote locally, regionally, and globally that conservation of living resources are important to humans and future generations to enjoy our natural uh, resources. Today, we have invited members of Rotary clubs and friends of Rotary from different parts of the world for this meeting. A hearty welcome to one and all. On behalf of wildlifers, I also extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished speaker, Dr. Michelle Casabon-Manet, and who will be introduced by Mr. Vishal Ramjatan. Over to Rotarian Maria to please introduce Mr. Vishal. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rotarian Sanjay. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of our Trinidad and Tobago chapter, I extend warm New Year greetings to you all. Thank you for joining us this morning, and we are deeply grateful to the Global Fellowship for granting our country the opportunity to present today. We also appreciate Dr. Michelle Casabon-Manet for sharing her expertise on the crucial subject of sea turtle conservation in Trinidad and Tobago. Before I introduce Vishal Ranjaptan, I would also like to recognize the presence of one of our senior members of our Rotary District, that is Rotary District 7030, who is Julian Skeet. He's the Assistant Governor for Tobago Clubs. Just so you all know, briefly, our district located in the Caribbean extends from St. Kitts to the Guyanas, comprises 17 countries and close to 3,000 Rotarians. So it's my pleasure to introduce Vishal Ramjatan, who is a board member of the Rotary Fellowship of Wildlifers for Conservation, Trinidad and Tobago chapter. Vishal also serves as the acting coordinator for the Masters in Education program, focusing on curriculum concentration at the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus. In addition, he is dedicatedly pursuing a PhD with his research emphasizing the implementation of curricula using environmentally based innovative pedagogies. Vishal will now introduce Dr. Casabon-Manet. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Maria. Good morning, everyone. Today, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our presenter, Dr. Michelle Casabon-Manet. Michelle is the local expert on sea turtle biology and conservation in Trinidad and Tobago, with a PhD in environmental biology from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. Her PhD research on sea turtles offshore Tobago was the first study of its kind locally, where research and conservation efforts have previously focused on nesting beaches. She investigated issues critical for management and conservation through the application of diverse disciplines such as ecology, population genetics, and environmental economics. Michelle began her professional career as a research officer at the NGO Turtle Village Trust, or TVT, responsible for coordinating research and monitoring at sea turtle nesting and foraging sites, working closely with several community-based organizations. She currently works at the environmental consultancy Coastal Dynamics Limited, where she has gained significant experience conducting environmental impact assessments and various ecological studies in a variety of habitats. She is a member of the biology department and acts in the role of senior technical advisor responsible for maintaining high-quality reports. Michelle continues to be actively involved in sea turtle conservation through her voluntary role as technical advisor to the NGO Save Our Sea Turtles, Tobago, and as a director of species, a local NGO working towards improved management of our marine ecosystems through research, education, and advocacy. She also acts as a country coordinator for Trinidad under the wider Caribbean Sea Turtle Network, WIDECAST, and has participated in the cabinet-appointed National Sea Turtle Task Force as an alternate member. She shares her expertise by providing training in various aspects of sea turtle biology and conservation to members and staff of TVT, members of various sea turtle CBOs and NGOs, and staff of the wider wildlife section, forestry division, and fisheries division. It is my great pleasure to introduce Michelle this morning. Thank you.
Thank
you.
Over to you, Michelle. Yeah, what we'll do is at the end of your session, we'll take some questions. So you'll have about 40 minutes to address, and thereafter we'll leave the forum open for question and answers. All right, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for the introduction and the invitation to talk to your members today. I'm very happy to be here. I have a lot of sea turtles have evolved over 100 million years ago. They come from the the time of the dinosaurs. They have been very successful. They are adapted very well for life at sea. We tend to see them most commonly on nesting beaches, but they spend 99% of their time at sea. And in this picture, you can see some of the adaptations that help them be so successful. The shape of the shell is similar to, the cross-section of an airplane wing. It gives them lift, it gives them hydrodynamics to help them move quickly through the water. Compared with turtles that you would find on land or freshwater, they have evolved these longer flippers that enable them to swim very quickly. They have lost the ability to pull their head and limbs into their shell, and that is also an adaptation to help them swim faster, so they don't have water getting trapped in spaces as they try to swim. There are 7 recognized species in the world, all have this very similar body plan. I like this figure because it shows that they all have, share several common features, but they also have their special, unique adaptations to different habitats. So we have the leatherback at the center, is the largest sea turtle in the world. It's unique because of its softer shell. It doesn't have the hard keratin scutes of what we call the hard shell species. It's more flexible. It allows them to dive to greater depths than the other species, and they are well adapted to travel very long distances and do deep dives in search of their main diet, the jellyfish. We have also the green sea turtle. It's a herbivore found mainly in seagrass beds, but also in any habitat where algae can be found. Loggerheads with their large heads adapted for eating crustaceans and animals with hard shells, so crabs and clams and so on. Hawksbills tend to be found in your reef habitats where they feed primarily on a diet of sponge. They have a narrow beak that allows them to get access into those nooks and crannies in the reef for their diet. And you'll see that, they have all the hard shell species have a similar plan of these scutes fitting together on the carapace, so its shell, but they come in different sizes and slightly different shapes and patterns. And, each of them having these unique adaptations to different lifestyles. But there are also many, many things in common, the body plan itself, but also their lifestyle of spending so much time at sea, having to return to warm sandy beaches where they lay their eggs, right? They are all reptiles, they breathe air, and they lay eggs on beaches that need to stay dry and warm. I would like to show an example of the life cycle. This varies a little bit among the different species, but this is pretty accurate for both hawksbill and green.
Yeah, I think Dr. Michelle, we lost the connection. Yeah, Dr. Michelle, I think we lost the connection in between. You have to unmute.
Yes, sorry about that. I think that's my internet connection. Right. So during the course of the life cycle, what I want to highlight is that these animals are moving through many different habitats and crossing international borders, covering great distances in the ocean. From the epipelagic stage, that is a bit of a mysterious stage of their life. It's hard to study them at this small size. They also experience a lot of mortality, a lot of predation at this stage. So many of these animals that leave the beach are lost to predators. But those that make it to the next stage will now recruit or move into coastal waters where they switch their lifestyle completely from that pelagic style feeding at the surface of the water to now feeding at the bottom of the sea. So some of them have a very major switch in their diet at this time as well. What we find in this juvenile developmental habitat is you have a mixture of individuals that were born at many different nesting beaches across the region that these turtles are being pulled from. So for example, in Tobago, we have turtles that were born in Barbados, but also further away as such as Cuba, Puerto Rico, even possibly Mexico. These turtles spend a long time in this developmental habitat until they mature. It takes a long time before they reach sexual maturity. And at that time, they may shift to another similar habitat, but at a different location, often a little bit deeper, further offshore, before making their regular migrations to nest. And we know that females generally, it again varies a little bit from each species, but every 2 to 3 years, they'll be returning to nest. And they exhibit what we call natal nest site fidelity, returning to the beach where they were born, or very close to that area where they were born. So again, what I want to highlight is this migration movement, these shifts of lifestyle, the fact that they are spending many, many years of developing at sea in different types of habitats. This means that they are exposed to multiple threats, different threats in different habitats. The pattern of high natural mortality in the early phase of their life is demonstrated in this graph, starting with say 1,000 hatchlings. It's generally thought that only 1 in 1,000 hatchlings will actually survive to make it to adulthood. As they go through their life, they're very vulnerable in the early stages. And as I said, many are lost to predators. As they get larger and stronger and faster, their shells protect them better from predators. And once they reach this mature size, they have very few natural predators and threats. So typically, once you reach maturity, these sea turtles naturally would have a high survivorship, enabling them to return and nest. However, when you then add human threats that target these adults, that means that they're very much vulnerable at this life stage. So the adults are critical to protect because we need them to be reproducing regularly in order to replace themselves and continue the population. Right? Threats across the world, some of the major threats we still face today a harvest of sea turtles, which, you know, I would describe as poaching in most places where it's illegal, but it is still legal in some places, including parts of the Caribbean. It was only made illegal in Trinidad and Tobago in 2011. This would be harvest for meat, shell, eggs. We have bycatch has become a considerable threat for all species of sea turtles and different types of fisheries. This is the incidental or accidental capture of turtles in fisheries. Could be long lines, drift nets as shown here. We have coastal development, which means that we're losing nesting habitat, and the nesting habitat is becoming less ideal with lights and structures that can obstruct sea turtles and disrupt their nesting, which is of course a critical part of their life cycle. Now, why should we care about sea turtles? You know, there are many animals today that are globally threatened. Sea turtles is just one group of them. What I like to emphasize is that sea turtles are critical for maintaining healthy ocean ecosystems. They play some very unique and important roles in their different ecosystems. For example, hawksbills, through their diet on sponge, are helping maintain the biodiversity on reefs, enabling the corals to thrive. And we know we rely on reefs for many different services: the shoreline protection, fisheries, tourism, right? And similarly, green turtles on seagrass beds. So each sea turtle species, through their unique diet and their migrations and so on, play many critical roles. And without them, we would, really see the effects throughout our ecosystems. So now I want to bring it down to Trinidad and Tobago, and I know we have an international audience, so just stuck this in for those who are not too familiar with the Caribbean region. Here we have North America and the Caribbean archipelago. Trinidad and Tobago is right here in the Southern Caribbean, just off the coast of Venezuela. We have a population of 1.4 million people on the two islands, approximately 5,000 square kilometers in size, with just over 700 kilometers of coastline. Of those 7 recognized species in the world, we have 5 sea turtle species known to use our waters and our beaches. And this is based on the normal range of these species. So the 2 missing species are the flatback, which is found only around Australia, and the Kemp's ridley, which is found further in the Northwest Atlantic. So I would like to introduce you to the hawksbill, the green turtle, the olive ridley turtle, loggerhead, and the leatherback. Trinidad and Tobago is most well known for our leatherback turtles. We have a very significant nesting population, but all 5 of these species can be found here. And much like the rest of the world, sea turtles have been harvested for thousands of years. You can find evidence of this in archaeological sites. In Tobago, the first evidence we have is at least 3,000 years before now, where sea turtles were harvested. In the literature available, there's many comments about the arrival of the French in the 18th century, contributing to continued sea turtle fishing and harvesting at that time. We have the use of nets and spears throughout at least the 1940s, if not earlier. Meat and eggs were consumed. Shell also began to be used by local artisans to make different jewelry and tourism mementos and so on. We even have documented large exports of the hawksbill shell to Japan. The hawksbill is a species that was most commonly targeted for its beautiful shell. So in the 80s, just around before the CITES convention came into place and put a ban on this trade, these large volumes of shell were being exported to Japan. And in 1952, we have fisheries regulations being enacted in Trinidad and Tobago to create this legal season where you could fish turtles offshore from October to May. So I want to now introduce you to the scenario in Trinidad and Tobago in terms of turtle conservation. We are a very small island nation, but we have a very active civil society, I would say. And this is just a small sample of some of the most important players in the conservation efforts locally. We have civil society or community-based organizations such as Nature Seekers, Grand River Nature Tour Guide Association, SOS Tobago, Las Cuevas Association. We have the role of the Trinidad and Tobago Field Naturalists Club, which I will get into, who really kickstarted our conservation efforts. We work regionally or internationally with other researchers and networks, such as the wider Caribbean Sea Turtle Network. And we have, of course, government bodies that have a role to play as well in the Forestry Division, Wildlife Section, and the Environmental Management Authority. So I'm going to take you through a little timeline of some of the major things. Of course, I only have a limited time. I cannot get into the details, and I'm not naming every single organization because there really are just too many involved. But the work really started off in the 60s. As early as 1963, the Field Naturalists Club came to find out about heavy poaching of turtles, of leatherback turtles specifically on the east coast of Trinidad at Matura Beach. This is an organization, as you see, founded since 1891, with naturalists, a mix of people, including, researchers from the university, as well as just, regular laypersons with an interest in nature. And this group set out to start documenting what was happening and understanding how many turtles do we have on the coast. So they started patrols on the east and north coasts. A lot of these efforts were led by Professor Bacon, associated with the University of the West Indies. And these efforts went from the 1960s to about 1980. They also they began patrols in 63. They started the first tagging of turtles as well locally. This is the placement of an ID number on a turtle so that you can identify different individuals and start counting them and keeping track of their movements. All the data that they were collecting, they were able to then appeal to the minister at the time to make some further restrictions to the fishery. So in 1975, our rules were amended to change the season for fishing to better protect the nesting period and better protect the nesting females. Their efforts came to a close around 1980, and then we see groups like the Pointe Pierre Wildfowl Trust stepping in, as well as the Institute of Marine Affairs, began doing some more research into both the nesting beaches as well as the fisheries and threats offshore. In 1990, we see some very important steps happening. We have the Wildlife Section of Forestry Division stepping in. They were, trying to do patrols on the beaches with very limited resources, and they started engaging with the local communities. And through that, they trained people, they worked together with the communities and set up this co-management model to better protect the beaches. And through this action is when the first community-based group really came on board as Nature Seekers based at Matura. And at the same time, recognizing the importance of the beaches in that area, the government also stepped in to put in place particular protection for this East Coast stretch of Matura to Fishing Pond, meaning that this area was prohibited during the nesting season. You require a permit to go to the beach. So this enabled better control of who was accessing the beach and enabled nature seekers to step in to patrol and eventually start running tours as well. They have been a very successful organization, growing from strength to strength, starting with sea turtles. Now they have expanded to do many other types of ecotourism tours. They also do forest restoration works. Every year they have their Matura beach cleanup at the beginning of the season, right? The East Coast receives a lot of litter washing up because of the Atlantic Ocean pushing up all this litter on the coast. So they start off the season in early March with a beach cleanup, which has become a very popular event that draws a lot of locals to come and assist them. Right. In 1997, we have the additional beach at Grand Riviere being prohibited on the north coast. I'll show you a map in a minute. This was a very small beach compared to Matura and Fishing Pond. They are almost 20 kilometers in total. Grand Riviere is only just over 1 kilometer, but has become a very important nesting site with very high density leatherback nesting. Sorry, on the previous slide, the photo I had as well was Suzanne Lacan Batiste, who was one of the pioneers of sea turtle conservation in Matura. And here we have Len Peters from Grand Riviere. So again, this prohibition from the government took place in 1997. And also the Forestry Division worked with the community there to get these community-based patrols started. And that has now become the Grand Riviere Nature Tour Guide Association, which has also moved on to conducting other ecotourism tours and so on in the village. All right, in Tobago, we had efforts starting in the late 90s, and then that became more organized and formalized in 2000 with the creation of SOS Tobago. And then we also have, in 2006, Turtle Village Trust. So first, SOS Tobago, they operate in this region on the leeward side of Tobago, which is the sheltered side of the island, where this is really the zone where we have the highest density leatherback nesting in Tobago. It's very much lower numbers than what you see in Trinidad, all right, averaging between 300 and 500 nests per year. But it is very important. And this, again, was instigated because of the level of poaching that was observed, and just members of the community stepping up and saying we need to come together and make efforts to address this. So their patrol started in 2000, tagging started in 2005, and I have data here from 2008 because that's when their effort became a lot more consistent along the stretch. All right, 2006, I mentioned Turtle Village Trust. Turtle Village Trust was set up as an umbrella organization, coming together with, at the time, it was about 4 organizations. I don't have the logo for the other group, which is based out of Fishing Pond. So we had Fishing Pond, Matura, Grand Riviere, and Tobago coming together and, you know, saying we share all these common challenges, access to funding. We have people who visit each of the different beaches, and we have different practices at each of the beaches. Let's work together to form a national program. Let's reach out to different funders together as a whole and set up a national monitoring program where all the data will be come together and shared among these groups. So that was a large initiative for the country and very important, I think, and they were able to bring in funding now from private sector oil and gas companies such as BHP Billiton and later Atlantic LNG. Previously, a lot of the work that was being done some was voluntary, some was funded by through the government, through the wildlife section for paying patrollers. And then, of course, you had groups at Matura and Grand Riviere were able to capitalize on tourism and actually have income through the tours that they run, but that is not possible for all the beaches that we have. So TVT has expanded over the years and brought on board something like, I believe, approximately 20 different communities that are now involved in the national program. They also were able to obtain funding through the government's program of the Green Fund, which is a fund set up for company taxes. A portion of all companies pay taxes into this fund, which can be used for environmental work and conservation. So they had some years of funding through that and were able to really expand the coverage of our beaches and capture data from a lot more places, and also eventually looked into in-water work and so on. They are still facing challenges, though, that a lot of their funding has come to an end, and the groups now in the last few years due to COVID and then this lack of funding, have come under quite a lot of challenges. Right, in 2008, the first in-water studies were done. So in most places, we have the, we see this pattern. Sea turtles are most often encountered on land by people on the beaches, and that's where we first step in and work with them. But sea turtles spend so much of their life at sea. They face so many threats at sea. It's very important to study them in water as well. So in 2008, I conducted some of the first research for my PhD around Tobago using scuba dive operators who were diving recreationally. We did dives with them to look at the distribution and abundance of sea turtles at these dive sites. We looked at the genetic links between our foraging turtles and the regional nesting beaches that they were coming from. So the pictures show me working underwater. We would catch the turtles underwater, tag them, take samples for genetics. We would measure them, and so that we could assess what is the status of these turtles. And that was carried on a little later by Turtle Village Trust. Also, while I was working there, we did some more in-water research using kayaks as well to do surveys to look for turtles. This was also later carried on in a little bit on the north coast with Grand Revere and further around Tobago with another group called ERIC. Right, another step I think I may have failed to mention on the timeline just now. Another important step was the development of the Sea Turtle Recovery Action Plan. This is a document that was prepared with the help of Widecast, right? The NGOs locally had a big part to play in this as well. This was, examines and documents all the information we have about sea turtles and identifies what are the priorities, where the gaps that we need to do more research in, where the priorities for protection, what recommendations can we make towards changing the laws to better protect these animals. Right, so then I want to highlight the legislation side of things. So I mentioned already in 1975, we had restrictions to the fishery, but we remained with a 5-month open season for fishing turtles until 2011, when that was finally closed. Along the way, we had the formation of the Environmental Management Authority, and they developed the Environmentally Sensitive Species Rules, ESS rules. These allow the EMA to designate species of special importance that requires more protection than our other protected species, and they are protected by much higher fines. Then, while that was put in place in 2001, it wasn't until 2014 that the sea turtle species were actually declared as environmentally sensitive species and received this extra protection. And I just have a snapshot here of the type of legal protection that they are offered. So this is the limitations on use and prohibited activities. So we went from a fisheries regulation that basically said you cannot hunt turtles, you cannot catch them, you cannot sell them, you cannot have eggs or meat. But this goes into a lot more detail about other activities that are prohibited. So any device or substance that may harm, stun, or impact a turtle, dumping, littering, or polluting, anything injurious to the ESS, the disturbance of it at any time, even disturbing, destroying, or any action or habitat alteration, right? Anything that's determined to cause or likely to cause harm. And finally, that fine is 100,000 TT and imprisonment for 2 years. That's almost equivalent to 15,000 US. So we went a major win here for our legislation. This was something that was called for a long time. And now, between the increased fines and all of these prohibited activities, it offers a lot more opportunity to protect these sea turtles under the legal system. So we've had many successes over the years. I want to start off with the successes before I get into challenges and recommendations. Through the action of all the community-based groups and NGOs over the decades, we've certainly had increased awareness among our citizens and seen a behavior change where people appreciate these animals, especially the leatherback. We've seen significant reduction in leatherback poaching. The patrols were necessary at the beginning to stop that, but I think now in most places, if you pull back a bit on the patrols, you would not see a significant rise in the poaching, because the community now also sees the value of these animals, especially in the areas where ecotourism has developed. The communities have come to rely on this attraction to their community. We've seen significant leatherback nesting population growth. Through the 90s, we saw a rapid increase in nesting numbers. Around the early 2000s to mid 2000s, the estimates were that we have about 50,000 nests per year or more, laid by approximately 10,000 females. And at the peak of the nesting season in beaches like Gran Rivera Matura, you could get hundreds of sea turtles in a single night. So you are almost guaranteed at this point to, go during the middle of the nesting season and be able to see, action like this. 2-3 leatherbacks very close together, walk down a beach only a kilometer and see, up to hundreds of turtles in a few hours over the night. So it's become, I think the example of Trinidad and the co-management we see was really a success story that a lot of other countries aspire to as well. What have we learned along the way? Of course, all of this patrolling came with data collection to be able to monitor the nesting numbers, understand what is going on with these sea turtles. Some of the international collaborations that have happened have allowed satellite tracking of leatherbacks, for example, to look at their migration routes. This is the map from one of the very first studies that was done with a handful of leatherbacks, showing just how far north they travel. Right? These are animals that, as I said, feed on jellyfish, and they go where the food is. They only return to the tropics really for nesting purposes. Otherwise, they are up feeding in the colder regions and they're well adapted for that. They are able to stay quite warm. This same study also helped us understand where the leatherbacks are spending their time when they are close to our shores. So females nest multiple times per season. They nest on average, I think it's roughly 10 days. Every 10 days, a female will nest maybe about 6 times on average for the season. So that female is here for at least 2 months offshore nearby the nesting beaches. And we have males as well would be in this area breeding. So the studies such as this have highlighted the importance of certain zones where we have a high density of turtles gathered during the nesting season. Over the years, we've noted nesting at probably much more than this 54 nesting beaches highlighted here around Trinidad and Tobago. Most people are familiar with the nesting on the north and east coast. That is where the highest density leatherback nesting takes place. But we have hawksbill nesting much more widely scattered. Even the leatherbacks is more widely scattered along the north and east coast, but hawksbills are even more so. They are nesting even on these smaller islands we have on the Northwest Peninsula here, where we don't have very much sandy beaches, but hawksbills are very hardy and able to nest in quite some difficult locations. So while we don't commonly see if you talk to most Trinidadians, they would have been to a nesting beach, they'll have seen leatherbacks, but they will never have seen hawksbills. But hawksbills, when you add up the numbers that we're seeing around all these tiny beaches, and a lot of these are more remote beaches that you cannot easily access, unfortunately, that is also where we see most of the poaching still occurring, will be at those beaches where you don't have a high presence of people and it's happening under the cover of darkness. A lot of people don't know that it's still happening quite a bit. I'll now talk a little bit more specifically about each of the 5 species that we have. So we have the leatherback here. Globally, it's listed as vulnerable. We have them only as seasonal visitors here to mate and nest, right? They're not spending their whole time here. And the major threat locally has been identified as gill nets. The use of these drift nets used off Northeast Trinidad especially. And worldwide, the major threat to leatherbacks is fishing of different types, bycatch and different types of fishing gear. So even when they leave our shores, they are vulnerable to other types of fishing elsewhere in their habitat. Our turtles are part of the Northwest Atlantic population, and there was a status assessment done in 2019. And this particular, while globally turtles were downgraded to only vulnerable, they've been upgraded for this population to endangered because of this severe decline, significant decline that's been observed across the region. We locally, as I mentioned before, we had rapid growth in the 90s, but locally it looks like we have a small decline since 2006. This is a smaller rate of decline than we're seeing elsewhere in other parts of the Northwest Atlantic. So for example, the Guyanas have had a significant, something like 90% drop in nesting numbers. So we are seeing signs of concern across the region, but it highlights that Trinidad and Tobago is really important to maintain, because right now we are one of the largest nesting assemblages in this region, even across the world. So it's important that we take steps to make sure we maintain those numbers. Other successes, as I mentioned, these, the groups at Matura and Grand Riviere in particular have been able to capitalize on tourism because of the combination of things that they have. They have easy to access beaches. They have high numbers of leatherbacks so that people are guaranteed the opportunity. If you come during the season, you are going to see a turtle. And people are willing to pay for this. So we have local visitors as well. A large bulk of these people are local citizens coming to experience this. I have some data from 2014 here with over 14,000 visitors for the year, raising something like 46,000 US in income. These people also pay a small fee that goes to the Forestry Division Wildlife Section for their permit to access the beach. In Tobago, this is less, not monetized so well. We have more people engaging and watching, but without paying a fee. The numbers, they are a lot smaller, so it's not such a guaranteed product that you can get to see. But those two communities, Grand Riviere and Matura, have really been able to develop a whole almost industry around the turtles coming out of this. Now they have expanded to include craft, jewelry, different things on sale for the people who come to visit. They provide, there's offerings of food. You can go and have accommodation, spend the night in the area. You can do other tours, hikes to these beautiful waterfalls, kayak in the river. And these benefits have now spilled over. So not just the community-based organization themselves are benefiting, but the wider community who are able to now offer these services to the increased number of tourists coming through their region. Right, we have the hawksbill turtle next. As I mentioned, this is the sea turtle that we see a lot on our beaches as well, but it's just so scattered around these small beaches all around the islands that we know less about it. People are less aware of them, and they are still the species that experience quite a bit of poaching. We also have juveniles of this species year-round. So we have seasonal nesting turtles visiting, but we have juveniles year-round on important developmental habitats. And that also deserves, further study and work to conserve them. Next, in abundance offshore, we have the green sea turtle. We don't see many of these nesting, but we see green turtles year-round in our waters. They've herbivores feeding on seagrass or algae, so we can see them on reefs. I would see them around Tobago on reefs where they feed on algae. We see them in other habitats of seagrass beds and other just rocky habitat where you have seaweeds growing. I believe this species is probably the most abundant one we have in the water. Many places around the coast of both islands, we have been getting, we've seen ourselves and have been getting reports of green turtles, juveniles feeding in the water. This species is particularly vulnerable to a disease called fibropapilloma. So another area of work is looking into how common these cases are and how prevalent it is in the population. We've documented cases on the west, east and south coast of Trinidad so far, and it's suspected. I've since actually seen photos on the north coast of Trinidad and Tobago that suggest we may have it there as well. So this is a debilitating disease that some turtles can recover from, but it can bring about their death. So we need to know more about how much this is impacting our turtles locally. It's also associated with poor water quality. While it's caused by a virus, it's more common when the water quality is not good. Right? The last two species are the most rare species. We have the olive ridley here. This is the smallest of our sea turtles, considered rare locally on beaches and at sea, but all these photos were taken locally. Two in Tobago, with this one nesting a few years ago in Tobago. This one was injured off the south coast in 2007. And these two were found off the southeast coast of Trinidad entangled in ropes. So they do exist around here for sure. We again know very little because they're so, we have such infrequent encounters with them. They tend to live a lot further offshore in more of a pelagic environment as well, and in soft bottom habitats, so not attracted to our reefs where divers would tend to encounter them. Finally, we have the loggerhead, again considered quite rare locally, but all 5 of these individuals were recorded locally. We had a stranding on the east coast of Trinidad of this individual, which is just about a subadult size, not quite mature. It was ill and needed some rehabilitation before it was successfully released. So other organizations we have working in Trinidad include your vets, right? We have vets from the University of the West Indies. We have a local rehabilitation. We have a number of rehabilitation groups. One in particular, the El Socorro Wildlife Center, has stepped up with a lot of sea turtle cases, right? We've had this species, again, is not likely to be restricted or really found on our reefs as much as maybe found in other types of habitats where people are not present as much to document them. So we've had a number of interesting reports from even the Gulf of Paria, which is quite a muddy habitat with low visibility, where people don't think of as habitat for sea turtles, but it may be quite well suited for the loggerhead, which might feed on shrimp and crustaceans in the mud. All right, finally, I just want to highlight a project of my organization, Species. This project started last year with funding from SPORAC, the Regional Activity Center for the Convention on Specially Protected Areas and Wildlife. It is a citizen science-based project. The idea is that we want to engage with the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to help us learn more. So we have people, we have divers, we have free divers, we have fishermen, we have other people doing boat tours regularly, people who will spend a lot of time in the water or along the coast that will encounter sea turtles more often than others. And we're targeting them and asking them to join us in this challenge to report their turtle sightings to us, send in photos or even just information so that we can better map out where our sea turtles are using habitat offshore. And then we can then identify perhaps critical habitat that we need more protection, or threats that may be an issue in certain areas, whether it's bycatch or boat strikes or different threats experienced in the area. So it's a project that we launched last year, but will be ongoing, have already helped highlight some of the seagrass habitat in the area down the islands, what we call down the northwestern peninsula, where we see really abundant green juvenile turtles feeding on this seagrass habitat. All right, so almost finished. The last couple of slides here. The challenges I want to highlight. While we have had great success, I would say, over the decades since the conservation efforts have begun, we are still faced with challenges. Quite high on that list is the lack of consistent funding. Now, people will tell you that projects like this we should look for ways to make it sustainable. The tourism is a good option that may work for certain locations and making it sustainable, where the tourism fees coming in can go back into patrol and monitoring efforts, but that does not work everywhere. So it's still a challenge to year to year try and get enough funding to help maintain this valuable service, and even expand it. You know, as I said, poaching is still happening in certain areas, especially areas not regularly patrolled, targeting the hawk spills. So, you know, we need greater efforts there. So we have that challenge of the continued poaching at sea as well. We have enforcement challenges with limited resources, both our community-based groups as well as our legal government agencies such as Forestry Division have limited resources to you know, limited numbers of people, limited vehicles to really get out there and patrol. There seems to still be a little bit of sort of uncertainty around our legislation. You know, I really highlighted the ESS rules, and the potential for that is great in that it covers so many activities that could impact sea turtles indirectly. But we're yet to really see that enforced. So we still have activities like driving on beaches, like lights on beaches, that you could all argue would be illegal under those ESS rules. But we have not seen it applied in the sense of any of the authorities going and stepping in and laying charges under these rules for activities like that. Coastal development is an ongoing challenge in certain places, especially Tobago. We have a lot more tourism in Tobago, so many of our important beaches have hotels, have lights on the beach which disrupt turtle nesting. And there's, you know, always talk of more developments happening, new hotels, new ports, also coastal protection structures people want to think about, which can have impacts on sea turtle habitat. I already highlighted bycatch as a major threat. This is the issue that's, it's not been ignored, but it is the most challenging issue, I would say, to solve. It really requires working together with the fishermen to find a solution. We cannot just ban this type of fishing outright. We need more efforts to work with them to look at development of different gears to mitigate this impact. And this has been done internationally, and there have been some efforts locally, and I'm looking forward to some efforts in the next few years by some international researchers from NOAA and so on, who have started engaging with us about stepping in to try and test the use of lights and technologies like that on the nets that have been shown to reduce bycatch. Over the last 6-7 years, we've started seeing influxes of sargassum on our beaches. This has been a problem with covering up our nesting beaches, and you know, when it's really bad, this would mean that turtles can get trapped in the sargassum and unable to nest, or the hatchlings unable to emerge and get to the sea. This is partly due to climate change and agricultural fertilizer runoff and all these things, and is a regional issue, not just locally. So it's something that we have to really just step in and react to when it happens. There's a lot of work going into how we can deal with it, but ultimately at this point, it just requires removing the sargassum when it's coming in the best way possible. Right, and then we have these broader international issues, climate change, which is leading to sea level rise, leading to increased storms. So that's contributing to erosion of our beaches and nesting habitats. We have rising temperatures, which in turtles is an issue because it actually contributes to a change in the sex of the species. So sea turtle eggs, sea turtles don't have sex chromosomes like X and Y like humans do to determine the sex. They have a temperature-dependent mechanism. The hotter the temperature of the sand, the more females are produced. And we're seeing internationally reports where the population is becoming increasingly dominated by females. So that is a broader issue that is going to be a challenge. Plastic pollution, of course, is always an issue throughout. You know, we're seeing more and more small turtles that live in the pelagic environment, especially, are the ones going to be consuming a lot, ingesting a lot of microplastics in particular. That has been shown to be a really dominant problem. Right, so my recommendations for Trinidad and Tobago, we need to look into enhancing and sustaining the funding for these efforts. I think that we still have some differences in protocols of how the groups operate in terms of data collection as well as tour guiding. I would like to see some more standardized protocols and implementation of best practices. We've been using the same methodology as well over the decades to research our turtles, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but at the same time, we have to look at, are we achieving what we need to achieve? Are there better ways to do this, to improve the data that we're getting, to get it more efficiently? I think there's a lot of room to evaluate that. Continued work is always necessary with the public in terms of awareness, sensitization, changing behaviors, because while poaching is an issue and we can try and work on enhancing our law enforcement, really that change will come when we get people to change their minds and stop seeing sea turtles as a delicacy, which is almost what they see it now, as a delicacy, a treat that they would use. Right, again, I mentioned the need to work with fishermen addressing bycatch. I would love to see more in-water studies and greater collaboration. And greater collaboration, I mean, within Trinidad and Tobago, again, we're a small country with so many groups. There are some efforts to collaborate through the National Sea Turtle Task Force I mentioned and other mechanisms, Turtle Village Trust. But I feel that there's still a lot more room to collaborate and improve things locally, and also more collaboration internationally with some of the expertise available in the region and worldwide. And that brings me to the end there. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions if we have time.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Dr. Michelle. It was really nice, very crisp, and very well presented. I now throw the floor open for questions. If either you can post them in the chat box, or you can just use the hand raise option. Rashmi will unmute the speaker. Yeah. So, in fact, there are a couple of questions already in the chat box. So, Mr. Jalaluddin Khan wants to know, what are some suggestions to prevent poaching, especially in Tobago harvest festivals, to change cultural consumption? And he also further asks, can we have a group discussion? How can enforcement be implemented? How have other countries, example, India, activated government enforcement action? Why Trinidad and Tobago? Just a second, I just...
Yeah. Why don't we have active enforcement?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Jal. Good to hear from you. Certainly, so what he's mentioning in Tobago is these cultural celebrations that are held in the different villages along the coast. Annually, they have a harvest celebration where they often will have wild meats, so meats that are hunted both from the forest as well as sea turtle meat. And I do find Tobago and some of the more rural areas in Trinidad are, the most challenging. These are the areas that really have this cultural practice of engaging in sea turtle consumption. They've done it for decades. Their parents engaged in it, their grandparents engaged in it. It's how they grew up, and it's normal for them. So this is where all I can say is, enforcement is an issue, but at the same time, we need to work with people and sensitize them, make them aware of the value of these animals, their vulnerabilities, why it's important that we protect them now. Because really, we can't have active consumption and harvesting when we don't know the levels of the harvest either, or anything. We don't know really the impacts that we are having we're not just impacting locally as well. I think that helps when I've talked to fishermen before. They don't realize that these turtles are not restricted to our waters. They are crossing international borders. So we are, by harvesting turtles on our reefs, we are impacting nesting beaches throughout the region. So it's a tough cookie to crack. There's different avenues we can take. I mean, many countries will have experiences as well with these issues. And certainly, you know, if anyone here from India or any of the other countries present would like to give some examples, that would be great. Law enforcement here in terms of government enforcement action. I see a number of issues. Wildlife section has traditionally been the agency tasked with this enforcement. They have traditionally had very few staff, something like 17 game wardens for the entire island of Trinidad at one point. That has now been significantly increased over the last couple of years, but they still have limitations with vehicles and getting around to access these different locations. Turtles is only one small part of their responsibility. They're responsible for all the protected areas we have on land. So I don't think there's any way to get around it. We need more investment in enforcement action, whether that is through the game wardens or another agency to step up and take on that role. But I know money is a big part of it. I think I had one other thought on that enforcement. We have honorary game wardens as a strategy. It's been employed by bringing in members of the public with an interest and knowledge to participate and they are given the powers of arrest and so on. But I think that program has potential, but could be further developed. And one more thing I think about enforcement here is it also, so well, as I mentioned, the game wardens, forestry division have been really the ones with that role. But I think we need to work with the police and work with the army and fisheries and any of your other agencies that really do have the power to arrest and so on, but they are not familiar with the law perhaps, or they don't see it as a priority. So there's no focus on it. And we see some issues where, you know, these small communities, the poachers, everybody knows who the poachers are. And, you know, in a lot of places, they're well known, they're respected members of the community. And so there's a reluctance there on the part of the enforcement officers to step in. And sometimes the enforcement officers may engage in some of this activity as well. I can't say, but there often seems to be almost a reluctance among these officers to step in and enforce the law. So it really is a cultural thing we need to work on.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Michelle. Anyone, Vikram or Nahar, wants to take that question, how the conservation is done in India? If you can.
ಇಲ್ಲ sir, ಏನು ಇಲ್ಲ sir. Not at the moment.
Yeah, Vikram Hiresave or Nahar?
Yeah, Sanjay, am I audible?
Yes, Nahar, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Michelle. It was a wonderful presentation. We've got to know a lot of things about the Caribbean and the conservation efforts that are going on. Many congratulations to you and your team for this excellent work. So, just to give you a background, so I live in India, on the eastern coast of India, a state called Odisha. And the state is very interesting because it is having one of the mass nesting sites. It is one of the mass nesting sites for the olive Ridley turtles. I don't know if you have heard about it, but therefore the state also has a conservation regime. Now, I personally work in the tourism domain, and I try to see things from tourism angle, and I see a potential of promoting tourism especially when the mass nesting happens. And in your presentation, you talked about the initiatives that are happening in that part of the world. Though your data was shown for the year 2014 and perhaps for 2015, though the latest figures are not available, but I presume that the tourism related activities are still going on. Now, with that as the background, I would like to know what are the negative impacts uh, which can happen due to tourism for the conservation. Because positive sides you had already mentioned, a lot of community benefits plus revenues for the conservation, etc. But I would like to know more about the negative effects, how we can actually control the tourism for the benefit of conservation as well as for the benefit of local community and other initiatives. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you for the feedback, and that's a great question. Yes, unfortunately, I just didn't have at hand any more recent figures, but tourism is certainly ongoing. We did have a couple of years heavily impacted by COVID restrictions with no international arrivals. We had beaches were closed and activities like this were restricted. So it's just sort of picking back up in the last couple of years. Yes, there can be negative impacts with tourism. We do have some things in place to manage that. Part of it is on those beaches that are prohibited with the permits being required. That means that we can have a carrying capacity. We limit the number of permits that are issued every night, so we don't have too many people on the beach at one time. Each group has different I think numbers that they use for like their ratio of one tour guide to 20 people or whatever that ratio is. But they do their best to manage the group size so that they have good control and management on the beach. At Matura, one of the things they have is there's a trail at the back of the beach that they can use to take people down the beach to access different parts without having them walking down the sand in the middle of the nesting area at times. There have been some studies to look at the impacts of that tourism activity. And so far at Nature Seekers with Scott Eckert from Widecast and some of his students looked at some of those things. And so far they did not find very significant impacts of the tourism. The hatching success, for example, has been roughly the same in areas that are used for tourism and areas that are not used for tourism. They've done things like measure the heart rate of turtles during tours to see if they react to the activity around them. I believe there was some elevated heart rates with lights, and most, if not all, the beaches generally require the use of red lights instead of white lights. But that is one of the areas that I think still needs a little more focus to make sure that we're up to standard with international best practice in terms of both the numbers of people in the group and the use of lights. I think it could be done more sparingly in the interest of caution to ensure that we are, even if we can't measure an impact on the turtle, does not mean that there is impact happening. So many beaches elsewhere restrict the use of lights more strictly and have no touching of animals, no people in front of the animal. They only go to the back during the laying process. So there is room, I think, to improve on some of our practices and have them more standard across all the beaches. But generally, I know that the groups have the interest of the animals at heart and have over the years been doing what they think is best as well to reduce those impacts on turtles. And certainly in the large scheme of things, we're certainly seeing, as I said, increases of numbers of turtles at least up until 2006 or so, and now it's sort of leveled off and maybe a slight decline. But we've been so far able to conduct the tourism with little measurable impact, I would say.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Michelle. One quick comment: if those research reports are available and if it is possible for you to share about the study that you were mentioning, some of the university colleagues of yours have carried out, I would be interested to refer to those studies if it is available. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, the next question we have is from Krishna. Are you working in collaboration with other countries like Kenya?
Not personally, and I am not aware of anyone locally who would be engaging with Kenya at least. Certainly, as I mentioned, we have an excellent network in the Caribbean called the Widecast Sea Turtle Network, that we are regularly in touch with each other. So that's going from Bermuda down to Brazil. And that's quite an active network that they have annual meetings. We started some monthly meetings with presentations to learn from each other in different research areas and so on. So there's quite a good started collaboration, at least within the region. And some of the researchers in the region would also have their, international colleagues at other universities. So certainly the US is very active, as well as some universities in the UK have quite a high presence in the region as well. So there's also international sea turtle meetings where we can exchange ideas with other international groups and different seated email lists where you can reach out and collaborate with persons. So there's many opportunities out there for collaboration.
Thank you, Dr. Michelle. Bharat, my friend, wants to know, do you think having school lessons about changing poaching and cultural practices and protecting wildlife will help?
Yes, and I think it has. I think, one of the things maybe I didn't mention with those NGOs that have been active since the 90s, let's say at least. A lot of them engage in regular presentations, engaging with schools and young people, both not just through the tours that they do, but going out to schools and sharing information with them, doing presentations. And I think, as I said, we've certainly seen a behavior change, and people are more responsible. People are more aware of not just don't eat turtles, but don't use lights on beaches, don't drive on beaches, don't ride on turtles. We used to have people going and taking pictures sitting on top of turtles, and that is a rare sight now. People will blast you on social media if you post something like that, because many people are aware that you just can't do those things. So I think we have had a lot of those efforts, and they have been helping. And I do think we need more to continue that down the generations, and perhaps with more of a focus on the other sea turtle species and what people can do about sea turtles in the water as well, because a lot of the messaging so far has really been on the nesting leatherbacks, and sort of the other species have been ignored to an extent.
Thank you, Dr. Michelle. Is there any specific advice you would give to a high school senior aspiring to study earth and environmental sciences as an undergraduate in terms of research or networking? This is a question from Anushka.
Yeah, hi. I get this type of question quite a lot. There's no one easy answer, but I think part of it is if they can reach out to the different universities before they before they register and get started, look at the different programs and really find something that's of interest to them, that they're passionate about. I find more and more recently it's very easy to switch around, to start off with a broad base and then fine tune what area you're going into later on. And, you know, you find people able to switch careers and apply skills from one area to another area. So it's not that you're going to be pigeonholed into one thing. I think also when, you know, again, with coming to skills, there are many skills these days that are valuable to someone in these kinds of careers or fields that in addition that you want to make sure you work on in addition to your degree, right? For example, locally in Trinidad and Tobago, we have hundreds of graduates every year from UE with the same environmental natural resource management degree. Many of them apply to my company and nobody stands out. They all have the same qualifications. So you need to stand out by doing additional skills outside of your program or diversifying your program and showing that you have, could be something like a language. It could be a skill like scuba diving or experience in fieldwork or computer programming. IT skills is very, you know, increasingly in demand. So make that effort to make yourself unique and have a marketable set of skills that would make you more employable coming out with your degree, I think is very important. And if you want to reach out to me more on that privately, you can feel free to contact me.
Yeah, I hope that answered your question, Anushka. Thank you, Dr. Michelle. I have one question from my side. You said the turtle shells were being exported to Japan, you know, earlier. What use do they? What is it used for? The turtle shells. What do they use?
Right. Good question. So over the years, you know, it's been used for probably thousands of years. It's quite a good material for working with. It's almost like plastic. And so I tend to think of it, it kind of was used for a lot of things that we now use plastic for. People used to make glasses frames with it, jewelry, combs, different ornamental things. I'm just wondering if I can get one to show you. I'm not sure how it would look over the screen, but I can hold up one of the items that I have, perhaps, if you give me a minute. My assistant was one step ahead of me and went to get this. I will try to. This is a piece of hawksbill shell. You can see how thin it is. It's been carved in the shape of Tobago, with the name Tobago scratched into it. If you Google images of tortoise shell or hawksbill shell, you'll be able to see. You see it's quite shiny, smooth, quite not very flexible. Got a little bit of bend to it. And you can see the pretty colors. So it's sort of translucent with these colors, kind of oranges and creamy colors and dark brown. So it was quite, I think it was an attractive material, easy to work with. And so Japan, I think they had a meeting in Japan a few years ago, and I saw pictures from that they had on display many materials like this that were made over the years, and they're spectacular. They're really well made things, but it was driving a lot of the trade in sea turtles for a number of decades or more.
I only hope that my question doesn't encourage anyone to seek for shells.
Yes, Google it and see some pictures, but it is now illegal, and it's illegal to trade or carry them internationally.
Yeah.
And illegal to possess in most countries.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Michelle. I think we are done with all the questions. Rotarian Maria, would you like to say anything?
No, I earlier on when I started, I wanted to I expressed my gratitude to Dr. Casabor Manet for agreeing to do this presentation, and it was very well very, very, how to put it? I think she covered everything in terms of the conservation and all the different targets as well. I like that the advice she gave to Anushka. So, and I could see more synergies coming out of this in terms of, if possible, using some of the examples from the clubs in India and Nairobi as mentioned, if we could probably partner with information sharing or even doing a joint project in terms of research. So on behalf of our TNT Fellowship, I would like to thank Dr. Manette for gracing us with her presence and also imparting on her knowledge and expertise, and in addition to the Global Fellowship as well. And I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Rotarian Maria. And there is an email ID that has been shared by Dr. Manat. If you have any follow-up questions, that's available in the chat box. You can make a note of it quickly. You can ask. Formally, I would like to thank Dr. Michelle Casabon Manet for sharing this wonderful presentation. And Mr. Vishal Ramjatan for introducing Dr. Michelle, and of course Rotarian Maria Mohammed Maharaj from the chair of the Trinidad Tobago chapter for bringing us such a wonderful speaker. It was so enlightening, and we learned so much about turtles today. Dr. Michelle, we also invite you to visit India to see the turtles here. Most of the turtles, turtle species that you referred to are there here, are found here as well. So you are most welcome to visit. All the global members are welcome to visit India. Stay in touch. Thank you. Have a good day. Good night. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Good
Thank you
night.
very much.
Okay.